Order this special meeting of the West Palm Beach Community Redevelopment Agency. Today is July 26, 2021, and the time is 3:31. We only have one item on the agenda. It's item number 2, resolution number 2140, approving the guaranteed maximum price of $3,382,741 for completion of the Sunset Lounge rehabilitation and approving the 5th Amendment to the Construction Manager at Risk contract with Cooper Construction Management and Consulting to establish a GMP, project schedule, and final scope of work. Mr. Rugg.
Good afternoon, Mayor, City Commissioners. Christopher Rugg, Executive Director of the Community Redevelopment Agency. So we've prepared we being myself, the development team for the Sunset Lounge, have prepared a pretty detailed presentation on this project beginning back quite a ways. So Mayor, if it's okay, I'm going to need to present from the dais, from the podium, as I'll be coordinating the overall presentation. It'll take anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes, just because there is a lot of information to cover for the commission to review prior.
That's fine.
Okay, thank you so much. So, quite a bit of information to get to this evening, this afternoon. So this is a list of all of the items that I'll be, and myself and the team will be going over. Obviously, just a general overview, because I do think just to kind of create a level set, and for our residents and visitors watching at home, an overview. I will speak a little bit about the initial planning. There's a lot of information as we went through the life of this project. We'll cover in detail the cost of the project, what we need to do to complete it. I do have Alfonso Hernandez, who is part of our team, acting as the owner's rep, and he'll be prepared to give his analysis as well. I do want to touch upon some of the work that I've done, or that this agency has done, relating to identifying the operator for the Sunset Lounge once it is complete. And then obviously just to summarize what we need to do to finish the overall project. And then from there, I'm sure there will be quite a bit of questions that we're happy to answer. So just, this is the historic Northwest. For just clarity purposes, Rosemary, FEC tracks, and Sapodilla heading north and south, east and west, 8th Street, 7th Street, Heart and Soul Park, which doesn't really give it justice because it wasn't done at the time that this aerial was completed, but Heart and Soul Park is there in yellow. The CMEX Center that provides quite a bit of concrete to our projects around downtown and the city-wide is just next to the tracks. And the area that we'll be discussing is the Sunset Lounge, where the saxophone was dropped and is the source of discussion today. And this is just a little bit of a closer look. You can see North Rosemary, 8th Street, Henrietta, and this was at the early stages of construction. So today, this is the project team that includes the contractor, Cooper Construction, the designer of record, REG, Alfonso Hernandez, as I mentioned, acting as owner rep. And although they will not be part of the presentation today, it is important to note that V-Star has done quite a bit of work on the interior design, which I will mention their role in the project, but they will not be speaking with us today. So the initial planning really started back in 2002 with a Sullen Lee report that emphasized, what was really needed to sort of bring back the charm and prosperity of the historic Northwest. and really was the first significant planning exercise. And there it was identified that the Sunset Lounge would really become this nucleus for the historic Northwest that really would be that driver of economic development and be that place that really was sort of the epicenter of the community. And it's important to note, it was kind of a quick, funny story. I was presenting this to my son last night, and he said, well, that's great, Dad, but what are they going to do there? I'm like, always share it with your child, and they'll tell you exactly what you're missing. So it's important to note that this is going to be a historic jazz club that had quite a bit of just, world-renowned acts that happened there. It really was the heart of the African-American community, and that was originally the importance of reinventing the Sunset Lounge and the rehabilitation project and the reason why we're moving forward with it. And you can see the evolution of the structure over the years. So starting in the life of the project, I use the contract amendments that this board reviewed over the years. And it really is two contracts, one with the designer of record, REG, and then the contractor, Cooper Construction. So using a kickoff point of April 2017, that's when the original agreement was signed with REG with a scheduled completion date of 2019. That was the initial completion date, October of 2019. Then as we start getting into amendments, you can still see that October 19th deadline was still maintained and anticipated, even with a couple of amendments that happened in 2018. However, as we started getting into additional amendments into these contracts, that's when the timeline shifted, and that was for a variety of reasons, which I'll get into here in a moment. Amendment 4, which really was a substantial one because there was a lot of unforeseen issues, which I'll also talk about. That's when the scheduled completion date was May 2021, and that was essentially the last time that this board had reviewed the project, and quite a bit of things have changed. So you can see the evolution of amendments, both with the designer and with the contractor over the life of the project. So thinking about the scope and the initial step that this board took in 2017 was really based on a much more of a simplistic design. The image to the left was a bubble diagram that was developed by REG. This is actually dated 2014, and that was anticipated into this larger site plan where essentially just the Sunset Lounge was going to be addressed as the historic structure with a little bit of amenities built in around it. However, in 2018, after a variety of reasons, including community input, but also wanting to expand the project, we included a full-service kitchen, a parking lot, and a new building, which created a much more of an elaborate and more holistic view and vision for the historic Sunset Lounge. And this is what we have been building under since it was approved in 2018. So going into each year by year, in 2017, REG was initially contracted to do a variety of work, pre-design, permitting, designing the construction documents for the historic Sunset Lounge. January of 2018, the first initial amendment, which included additional scope to include the restaurant and parking. This is where that same month we bring on Cooper Construction to do the pre-construction, because they had to be part of that process of understanding what was going to be the scope and all of the work that's associated with developing the project as a whole. And then Cooper Construction, the first amendment was really in June of that same year, where we set that first GMP, and that included the selective demo of the project. So as we go through this presentation, you'll see some notations here in red. And so each time I am going to ask our team members to come up and just add a little bit of information and context to those viewpoints, or I'm sorry, to those bullets, so that you have a little bit more information on exactly what was included in those numbers. So Miguel is going to elaborate a little bit more on that $735,000 number.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Board, and all in attendance. My name is Mikkel Green, Project Manager with Cooper Construction. And as Chris referenced, the first amendment to our contract was an increase of $735,897.35. This work included the selective demolition work for the historical Sunset Lounge, as well as the replacement of the roofing membrane and also some minor structural repair work. Chris?
Thank you. So the next step, later that year in November, the initial permit application was submitted by REG, and Rick or Brian from REG can talk about what was included in that permit application submittal.
Good afternoon, Rick Gonzalez, REG Architects. Thank you for allowing us to be here today. In that original submission, there were revisions to the site plan per the Planning and Zoning Board, Building Department comments per the MEP, and the structure.
So now as we get into 2019, the next contract amendment was related to the roof. And this is important because the roof did anticipate quite a bit of, when we started getting into the actual roof work, it was sort of the first thing that needed to be addressed. It had a lot of leaks and needed substantial repair, which was the first amendment to the roof. Mikkel?
Okay, so in April of 2019, it was determined by the structural engineer of record that there were additional structural repairs that needed to take place for the existing roof. So the scope overall for the structural elements that we refer to as the purlins, it increased drastically. So in order for us to actually do the sufficient repairs to essentially prevent water intrusion, they increased the scope, which in turn increased, of course, extended our duration as well as our general requirements and general condition cost. First?
We really needed that roof to be in a workable place so that we could continue the rest of the construction. It's important to note you'll see a couple of other amendments come through as we go through the time frame of the project. And but this was the only time that this amendment for the roof was brought to the CRA board. So next is probably one of the bigger changes, that Amendment 3, and this was really the substantial change where Cooper Construction came forward with the actual bid to do that comprehensive scope, that site plan that you saw earlier. And it does not include the pre-construction that we showed in that $45,000 number. It does not include the roof, and it also does not include the selective demolition. What it does include is all of the things to essentially bring it to its historic nature, and also reflects the increase in scope of the kitchen, the parking, the building, etc. And that's that new GMP of $10 million that was approved in September of 2019. Next, the master permit was issued with provisos. So this is where we start actually getting into, you can't really do work until you have a permit. So the permit was a big step. Rick?
Yes, and on top of the items that Chris mentioned and that I mentioned beforehand, additional items that came up were the unification of the parcels. As you recall, there was an alley abandonment too. We doubled the size of the property. And the streetscape, which when you saw the grand opening of the park, the streetscape portion was completed.
So that's the next, that same year, about a month later, this was that second amendment to Amendment 2, if you could follow me. So essentially Amendment 2A, which increased the scope, increased the cost of or reflects the increased cost for the roof repair. And that was done in November. Also in November, there was an additional scope increase for REG, as well as the V-Star contract. But I'll ask Rick to talk about what was included in that increased scope and GMP for that 202. Rick?
In September of 2019, we were working with John Ward at the time, and back and forth, my partner Colin Price was dealing with him directly. and with Arturo Cantero, who was the construction project manager. And John came to the agreement that 8% of 8.3 million, which was the estimate at the time, was $663,000. So he asked us to reduce that by approximately 50,000, which came up with the 615,000, which is the current contract that we have. Prior to that, 413 had been approved in the original and the amendment for the kitchen. So the balance was 202,000, which reflects the number that was approved.
And Commissioners, we will have a slide that goes over each of the full costs of all of these contracts. So it is in one condensed slide so that we're keeping track of all of this. I'm just laying out the timeline for you now. V-Star, which this is important to note, was added in December to help with the interior design work. And this was really done by the CRA in an effort for a couple of things. One is to really enhance the overall interior design of the Sunset Lounge, and then also to have it done by a Black-owned interior designer. And V-Star essentially brought both of those goals to hand. They have done an exceptional job, and this image reflects their design work, which we're anticipating to have something similar be presented or be included when the Sunset Lounge is ultimately completed. However, we'll have to go through some of those costs because the GMP today does not include a lot of the FF&E that is included in what you see here. So next, in March of 2020, there was another substantial amendment to the GMP. And this really is going to be reflected by a lot of the unforeseen challenges, which I think is important to note because it did include foundation and utility work, which Mikkel will give a little bit more background on.
Okay, so subsequent to receiving approval of the Amendment 3, we were issued an Amendment 4 that increased the contract value, as you can see, by the amount of $1.4 million, just to round it off. And this was mainly to address some historical footing issues that we had with the historical building. So a lot of these issues you could not uncover until you actually began the phase of construction. So that was identified by the structural engineer of record. We also faced some utility issues, as well as some owner FF&E, kitchen equipment, contingency, and sound and visual equipment are also added to the contract scope at this point in time.
Thank you, Mikkel. The final amendment for the roof cost increase is approved in April of 2020. And so now, June, if there was an item that really is sort of the point to where there was a significant delay to the design that we had to address, it was the mechanical design issues that were identified in June of 2020. Essentially, what ended up happening is that it was identified that the air conditioning system wasn't large enough to cool the building that we're essentially building. So in order to provide the adequate cooling, we had to increase the size of the air conditioning, which is what we're currently doing now. And that was an impact to the overall design and cost. But I do want to let Rick talk about that design issue and what was done to overcome it.
Thank you, Chris. And that is really the crux of the matter, is the most difficult portion of the project. This is the reason why 95% of architects don't touch historic projects, because there's always something that happens. But there's always a lot of good when it's completed. For example, in Boynton Beach with a historic old school, very similar parallels. From $4 million, it ended up being a $10 million project. Anyways, in this event, we had to deal with a mechanical engineer that had issues with the historic building is 3 stories. The addition was lower, 2.5 stories, because of zoning. We had to make it less than 3 stories. So we had issues of bringing the air conditioning from the new building into the historic. It was first brought up by the mechanical inspector for the city, so I appreciate Robert Brown's staff for helping us with that. And we were so concerned, we went at our own expense and reached out to Steve Henderson of Formica Engineers to do an evaluation, and he agreed. We tried to get the items corrected by Ben Ellis, the engineer at the time. We made no progress with him, so we made an executive decision to replace him. And the new engineer redesigned it. Another feature that happened besides the constrained space was the usage. The usage of the space was going to be ballroom, but it was also going to be dining. So because of dining, don't ask me why, but in mechanical codes, that generates more heat, which requires additional air conditioning. So therefore, portions of the faults from going from 60 to 100 tons to resurface the building, and with the new redesign, which has worked out very, very well right now.
It's important to note that I was brought on in July of 2020, roughly July 28th. And one of the first things, the mayor called me into his office and said, "Chris, I need you to get your hands around this project as quick as possible." And that's when, through the analysis of just the current situation, it was determined by me that we needed to bring in an owner's rep to really cut through some of the technical challenges related to the project. And that's when Alfonso Hernandez, and I do apologize, that number is not correct. It should be 132.6, but by any means, Alfonso was brought in October to assist with those technical needs. And then shortly thereafter, due to a lot of the things that Rick had mentioned, revised plans were submitted, and Rick can talk about what was included in the revised plans that were submitted in November. Rick?
As you heard from Chris, the prior director had brought in V-Star to improve the interior design, and so changes had to be done to the plans. We've worked with V-Star on several country clubs. They're a phenomenal firm. They do great work, and so we had to work with them and coordinate our drawings, remove interior details to accommodate their interior details. The new mechanical engineer we hired, he needed several months also to prepare new mechanical drawings to replace the other mechanical drawings. Thank you.
At the beginning of the year, the continued pressure from administration to make sure that an accountability plan was put in place for this project. And we immediately thereafter established sometimes twice a week meetings with the entire development team that is here today to go over exactly what we plan to do in order to bring this project to fruition. The revised plans that Rick had just mentioned were approved March of that same year. However, there did need to be another set of revised plans that were submitted. And this basically was the point where we decided we needed to sort of simplify the scope and bring it back to a TCO standpoint. And then also trying to build in as much information into the plans to address allowances that Cooper Construction was informing us needed to be included in order to move the project forward. Because without the necessary information, it's really hard for them to properly bid plans accurately. And anytime you include allowances, that can drive up the price. But Rick, could you just talk a little bit about the revised plans that were submitted to the city in April?
Thank you, Chris. As Chris mentioned beforehand, we also had a change in scope in that V-Star drawings were now going to be turned into REG drawings to simplify the scope so that we could finish the shell package first and then deal with the FF&E and interiors at a later date. That occurred. We also had DEI, who was the restaurant consultant that was advising to do some changes to the bar and to the restaurant layouts. And I think, let me make sure over here. Yes, so the two packages are the shell phase, which is exteriors, dry-ends, MEPs, separated from the interiors, which is FF&E, core base, and future building operator input when we get that operator on board.
So June of this year, Cooper does bid the drawings and promises the July 12th delivery date. That's occurred, and that essentially brings us up to today. So I appreciate you taking or just being patient with me on that. So now we're going to get into a little bit of the details relating to permits and costs of the project. And this is important to note because I do want you to know that our building department did everything in their power to move this project along, and we're really, frankly, I think great in helping move this forward. So you can see the different dates at which the original permit was submitted in November of 2018. There were 5 plan reviews associated with those plans, but the permit was issued in October 2019. When the revised plans that we just talked about were submitted back in November of 2020, they were issued in March with 3 plan reviews conducted, and then the final set, which only took 2 plans. So this is important to note, because if you take the time that the development team had it and the time that our building department had it and total them up, you can see that our building department really was doing what they could to move this project along. And that's important to note, because it is a city service that we provide, and our building department only had the plans in their possession for a short bit of the total time that this project was in sort of a permit stance. So of the design and construction costs, the design portion of it, as Rick had mentioned, the total is $615,000. To date, we have paid out a majority of that. Actually, that small remaining balance of $5,100 was approved this morning by me. Of the owner's rep amounts, a little over 50% has been paid to Alfonso Hernandez. V-Star a little bit more, because they had done quite a bit of work as it relates to the materials and some of the design renderings that they had done. And it is important to note that those design items have also been shared with the community, and V-Star was part of that as well. So getting into the construction, it's a little bit more detail, but you can see that $13 million that's we're currently operating under includes all of the amendments in pre-construction to date. Of that $13 million, what has been paid out is approximately 6.7. That retainage withheld is just a small portion that we hold on to until we know that the work has been completed. So really the balance to finish this project under currently approved agreements is 6.2. So if you include the requested amount, which is being considered tonight or this afternoon, it brings the total construction cost to $16.4 million. So now to go over that additional request and the breakdown of what is going to be included in that, I do want to allow Mikkel to talk about the finer details of what is going to be included. It's also important to note that I did include some information that I had gotten a request for. So I had left on the dais with you, and Hazel also has a copy of it, is what needs to be paid out of the $6.2 million, and then also the allowances that are included in the GMP, which you see here is that 714. You can see a breakdown that gives you a little more detail on the allowance amount so that you can look at where those funds are going as well. Mikkel?
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Chris. So Cooper Construction would have completed this project in accordance with the Amendment 3 and 4 cost agreements and within schedule and budget, should the drawings remain where they were at that point in time for that initial permit for Phase 2 of construction. But subsequently, the CRA made some good decisions to move forward, and now we come before you today in order to add the cost for the design changes that increase the scope of work. So that also extended our overall construction schedule, and that, of course, has an impact on general requirements and general conditions in order to see this project through to the point of TCO. Thank you. Chris?
So the remaining of that work needs to be included, includes the following. Mikkel?
Absolutely. So what's remaining for the Sunset Lounge? Roofing for the 2-story new addition building, the elevators that consist of the freight and passenger elevators. These elevators are constructed and they're stored in an insured warehouse by the manufacturer. So as soon as we can get the facility dried in, we can have those elevators installed. So they are manufactured. The mechanical equipment, piping and ductwork, that's remaining. Electrical rough, electrical panels, light fixtures, things of that nature. Your plumbing equipment, plumbing rough works, fixtures for fire protection, fire sprinklers, fire alarms, your kitchen equipment, and for the interiors, we have remaining interior walls, flooring, ceilings, doors, the interior painting, rails for stairs and ramps within the facility, and at the exterior, we have the painting remaining. For site improvements, we have hardscaping, landscaping, and irrigation. And just to continue, before you have laid out a schedule for an additional 12 months, that Cooper Construction intends to exhaust every possible option and resources in order to reduce the schedule by any means possible. So for the procurement of long lead items, starting with the roof, as you can see, there's a 6 months lead time due to just the volatile nature of the existing market condition. Not only do we have impacts with lead times for materials, but also the cost. It's unprecedented for a lot of our subcontractors and what a lot of us has actually experienced. So once we resolve the procurement issue, following the potential approval of this amendment, we'll roll right into roofing, and then our mechanical HVAC equipment, electrical light fixtures, plumbing fixtures and equipment, and of course, a lot of these items will happen concurrently, and of course, all leading up to the CRA's soft and grand opening.
So it's important to note the timeline because it is part of the amendment that is for you today is to extend that out to July of 2022. So in conclusion of the resolution 2140 that is with you this evening, it does reduce the scope to include a temporary certificate of occupancy to get that to a shell standpoint. The completion project date does extend it out an additional 12 months and amends the GMP for a project increases the GMP by 3.3 million. So as a total project cost, just full disclosure on everything that we have done to date, including land acquisition, when you include all of the work that has been, or price amounts that have been included, and the FF&E, which is still to be determined, that would be a future item that would need to come before this board, including the proposed amendment, you do see the subtotal amount of 19.8 million. It is important to note that because of some of the work that REG did, that we did get a state grant of $1 million for this project that has been used and spent, which brings the total of the Sunset Lounge project to 18.8 million. So now I do want to give Alfonso Hernandez, as the owner's rep, the floor to talk about just his experience, because he did do quite a bit of work of getting into a lot of the technicalities and working with Andy Zipman, our construction administrator, with the CRA. And so it is prudent for him to share his report of the project and the work that he has done with the CRA board. Alfonso?
Thank you, Chris, and good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. I appreciate the opportunity to be here before you all. And just to kind of explain a little bit of what I've done in this process to try to help move things along, as probably the first statement there is really kind of what I'm doing here. And basically my role is to try to help on some of the technical design issues that were experienced during the construction. Those are the type of issues that we were trying to make sure that we would help both, again, with REG, Cooper Construction, and the CRA to be able to move the project along. Sometimes you have to drill down into some of those details, and that's what we were doing to make sure that we could do that. We had an opportunity to review a lot of the items that were happening at the time, and so part of it was to review the architectural, the engineering drawings, and the design plans, and to be able to kind of understand what's happening. At the time, we also were looking at, again, city comments that were still in flux. There were some things that had not been completely addressed. There was city provisos that allowed for the permit to be provided, but those items needed to be fully addressed, and so there were items that were still pending, and so we wanted to make sure that those were addressed. Also, during a construction schedule, you obviously have RFIs and shop drawings that had not been addressed fully and had not moved forward the way that it needed to, and so we were looking at those and try to understand, you know, what some of the issues were. And so ultimately, the goal was to make sure that a final permit was received And that's what we were also looking at, is to making sure that the items along the way had all been addressed so that the permit could be achieved. So those are some of the topics that we've looked at. The other things that I guess are important to state is where we're at right now. We basically have had an opportunity to look at the GMP, and we are working with Cooper Construction to look at some of the items that are important to make sure that, again, some of these things could be achieved. Some of the hurdles that we did overcome had to do with a limited clearance on that second floor. It did have issues with mechanical systems and basically allowing a normal building to function properly because of the small limited space due to zoning and to some other issues, and it really needed to be improved, and we needed to look at it. So those are the issues. Some of the mechanical items at this point have been reviewed, have been addressed, and have been ordered, which is a good thing. As far as the finishes, we were able to kind of clarify, simplify, to be able to get the project to move a little bit further forward as well. And so the last real challenge really is just to work with Cooper Construction to make sure, both Cooper Construction and the team, that we can listen to some of the things that are happening out in the industry. Some of it, as Mikhail had pointed out, has to do with some of the shortages in materials and long lead times. And so this is a real thing in our industry. And so we are listening and moving forward. We want to make sure that we are able to potentially either make adjustments with products and things that will allow the project to be able to continue moving forward effectively. Obviously, other issues that do concern the CRA, myself, are allowances. We want to make sure that allowances are able to be defined even further. And so that's what that bullet point is about. We want to make sure that we work with Cooper Construction, and then again we define things very, very clearly, so that hopefully again cost is reduced. And then finally, again, the timeline, as Mikhail had pointed out on behalf of Cooper Construction, is that they're going to do their best to be able to bring the overall time schedule as far as they can. They've requested the 12 months in order to make sure that they cover themselves for what they need. But our goal really is to try to hopefully reduce that further by listening, by being interactive, by making sure shop drawings and RFIs are addressed, and site visits, so that we're there, interactive, to make sure that there's not a lot of questions that will be pending for too long. And so those, we hope, are some of the challenges that we can overcome and hopefully improve as we move forward.
Thank you, Alfonso.
You're welcome.
So just a quick slide on what's been done as far as the operations, because we do need somebody to operate this once it is completed. So the initial plan, some of which we have done, some of which we haven't, is doing the continued public outreach, which we have, which has been occurring, and drafting up some type of request for qualifications or proposals. Unfortunately, we have not created a Sunset Lounge Advisory Board or any kind of development board at this time. We have developed a business plan, which actually has been shared with the focus group, who we've had several meetings with folks from the neighborhood and local leaders to develop that plan, or develop the request for proposals / qualifications. And that will, you'll see that here shortly. That's in draft form that we continue to work on. And the idea is that we'll continue that community involvement in that operations bid, so that we manage and we're all clear on the expectations of how this thing is going to operate when it's all done. And that will be out before the end of the year. So just to finish, complete the TCO. We do need to identify that operator, complete the FF&E for the building, and then lastly, soft and grand openings, which will be part of the overall project. I really appreciate you all's time and patience with all of this information. I know it's a lot. Happy to answer any questions that you have, and I just want to close with this picture, because just want to keep in mind this is the reason why we continue to move forward with this project, because of just the historic nature and the love that this community has for the Sunset Lounge. Thank you so much for your time.
Okay, I'm sure we will have several questions. We'll begin with you, Mr. President.
I just have a quick initial question, just as a level set. At the time the CRA board initially approved this project, what was the cost estimate at that point? When it first came in front of the CRA board as, hey, this is something that, a project that would be worthwhile, and what was the anticipated cost at that point?
So I believe at the original onset, if you were to use the April 2017 number, was probably, I don't know, 6 or 7 million, but honestly, Commissioner, I'm speculating. Rick, I don't know if you have any insight into what the initial costs may have been discussed back when it was originally. And the reason why, Commissioner, is because really this project began a master planning effort back in 2014, and actually Rick Gonzalez was part of that. But as we've noted, the plans have sort of changed and evolved over time. So that original number that was anticipated, we'd probably have to go back and look at some past presentations to understand what that amount was. But really, my guess would be that it was probably somewhere a little less than 10 million before we actually got the technical understanding and the scope and everything of what was included into it.
Yes.
So initially, if we were thinking 6 or 7 million, I understand things change, and the scope of this project certainly, changed over time. But it's still, I still can't get over the fact that at the time that we first considered this project, if you had presented a $19 million price tag for rehabbing, this building and bringing it back to its former glory, that might have been a tough pill for this commission at the time to swallow, and they may have decided that it just wasn't worth it. Over time, the prices increased so much. I'm a big proponent and supporter of this project. I think if we could bring it back to its glory days, to the heyday, it would be such a fantastic thing. But everything, I guess, comes with a cost, and I guess it's appropriate that I picked a red pen out of my desk, because this is just, the costs just keep adding up, and it's become a significant cost project. And now we're faced with another, $3 million, $3.3 million ask. It's significant. That's all I have for now. Thank you.
Commissioner Schoaf.
Thank you, and thank you very much, Chris, for the presentation. There's certainly a lot of information about this project. It's a project I've been supportive of from the get-go. I've toured the building. The progress thus far looks really great. I don't think Commissioner Peduzzi is alone struggling with increased costs. So as I look at this project, and I think I take it from a couple different viewpoints, looking at it with a professional hat on of rehabbing a historic building, there are going to be unforeseen things in a historic building. So I get that there are changes that are unforeseen. I sat on this commission when we did the major approval of the $10 million guaranteed maximum price. And I remember having a very robust conversation at that time about if this was going to cover everything that we needed. And at that time, again, different management, not with you at the head of the CRA, we were told that it was going to more than cover. I guess it seems like the picture you show here is relevant because it seems like one of the major costs was that the MEP did not appropriately size the air conditioner. So who was in charge of the MEP? Where was that put into this project management? So at what point do we push back that is a major cost element and a driver of this?
Commissioner, the MEP was part of the design standpoint and was a subcontractor for REG. Mm-hmm. So Rick, I don't know if you want to address the commissioner's question.
Yes, and as I mentioned, besides working with Robert's staff on the sizing because of the change or the modification of the use from ballroom to ballroom and dining, and that brought, I wish the mechanical inspector was here, or the new engineer was here to explain that. That made us increase the 60 to the 100 tons. And the other issue was from the zoning size. If you look at the building, it's really a 3-story building, but they interpreted it as a 2-story building with a mezzanine. If you know, the top floor is a U-shape. If you've been all to the site, you've seen the mezzanine, right? So when that determination was made under the downtown master plan, the addition could only be 2 stories. And we were able to do 2 stories with a very small rooftop bar in the new addition, and that created further conflicts for the air conditioning. At that point, which would have required the equipment to go from the new building to the historic, above and through the roof. And that's when the decisions were made to make a change in direction, change of structure, mechanical engineer, to accommodate the new designs, to hang some of the equipment inside the ballroom space, for example, as ways of addressing the conflicts on the site and the issues from the zoning department.
So to what extent, and I've heard reference to drawings several times, and I know Cooper Construction has indicated that a large driver of this $3.3 million is due to change drawings. At what point do we look to see if those changes to drawings are relevant? If I put my professional hat on, one, there's a number of parties involved here, and if I'm quite honest, I would go back with my legal hat on and see who had legal liability throughout this project, because the cost drivers here and the mistakes that were made by a group of seasoned and professional, experienced individuals, there's something that has gone wrong along this process. And so if I were to put my hat on, I would go back and say, have we looked at how we can value engineer a plan back to meet into the original budget, and original being a relevant term here, back to our budget before our 3.3 being considered today? Have we looked at a way to value engineer our plan to get back to a place where we have a nice finished product, but we're not taking away $3.3 million worth of sidewalk fixes, light poles, and other improvements to the historic Northwest neighborhoods? We're talking about a zero-sum game of dollars to be able to be spent in this area. So have we gone back and looked at that to see if there's any way to value engineer back?
So Commissioner, to answer your question, you spent a lot of time looking at this. And to be honest, it's because we just needed to move the project forward. You know, is there a potential to do some cost savings? I mean, I think so, just by the number of allowances. But we really need to get into that to understand the details of those costs. And so it's an effort of spending more time on that while still getting the, you know, if there are additional funds approved, getting those approved so that Cooper can continue the project. So it is something that we've tried to spend some time to look at, but it's just trying not to waste any more time while doing the value engineering.
Sure, and I guess I hearken back to, if it's a change in drawings, what was the precipice of changing those drawings to get us here today? What about those drawings that were the originally bid on and budgeted drawings, which I understand there have been some changes along the way that have been detailed out with unknowns about roofs and structural engineering, et cetera. But from the last iteration where we were 100% sure that 10 million was going to be the number to today, and justifying the 3.3, I think that's the delta that I'm looking to close.
Right. So I guess really a lot of the issues relating to what's included in the final price, and then also what's included in the new price. I mean, to understand why those cost increases have, I mean, Mikkel, if you, or somebody from Cooper Construction, if you could come up and maybe elaborate a little bit more on those or on those cost increases to explain why the additional funds are required.
Yeah, so as Rick mentioned, one of the driving forces, one of the main components was actually the mechanical equipment. So that was upsized quite a bit from the initial 60-ton unit to, I believe, upwards of 100 to 120 if we're being specific. So not only did we have mechanical changes, there are also ripple effects, meaning that in order to accommodate some of these mechanical changes, you now have to sort of use the existing facility to create structural supports. You have to find ways to, because it's not a completely new building, it's not 100% new construction, you have to find creative ways, and very difficult ways, might I add, to accommodate these changes. So along with that, we also had some interior design changes that supported the view of the CRA and the interior designer. Chris mentioned V-Star, maybe to some involvement with REG as well. But those were some of the main changes we pretty much encountered, were MEP changes and interior changes.
And I'll say this and then I'll leave it to my colleagues. The part that I struggle with is at the $10 million approval, this was slated to be a restaurant serving food. There was nothing about the mechanical system that should have been different than today, perhaps undiscovered, but those changes should have been accounted for under the $10 million because nothing about this building has changed. It's still the same historic structure. We didn't add square footage on. We didn't do anything that would have changed that mechanical system. So where I struggle sitting here is those should have been known entities. And again, I understand from a construction point of view, you're going off of MEP drawings, but this all seems to go back to a mechanical issue, of which is not a changed condition from the time we approved the $10 million.
Commissioner Fox, and then Commissioner Lambert. Commissioner Ward.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I had the chance to tour this project a few weeks ago, and it really is spectacular. So I think in the end, we are going to have something for 50 years that people are enjoying. But right now, it is really tough to swallow this price tag, and especially knowing how closely you and I and your team have been working the last year to focus so much on the more neighborhood issues of garbage and public safety and fixing potholes and things like that, which has such a momentum now. I think the neighborhood is so engaged and looking forward to these additional changes that we're working with them. So I guess my question is there going to still be the money in the budget to move forward with some of those neighborhood projects that we are looking forward to completing or ongoing, and where, I guess, is this extra $3 million going to be coming from?
Right, Commissioner. So much of the $3 million, if approved today, it would have an impact on our budget, absolutely. As far as some of the services that we're currently providing and some of the other projects, luckily those projects do have encumbered funds, so they are able to move forward. Perhaps like some of the other things that we would like to do would have to obviously wait for a period of time until the funds are replenished. But for the most part, some of the basic services like some of our trash initiatives, obviously replacing some of the street signs that we work with Public Works on, as well as some of the innovative policing aspects, those will continue to move forward. But it's just the other capital projects and maybe new initiatives that we would like to undergo or begin. Unfortunately, we'll have to wait.
Commissioner Lambert.
Thank you so much for the very thorough presentation. And I agree with my colleagues. I'm excited to see this project come to completion. I think that the Heart and Soul Park there is a beautiful addition to the neighborhood, and that this will be something that our community can be very proud of. I want to go back to the discussion about the guaranteed maximum price and the discussion of unforeseen issues that may come up, because I do recall that we talked about unforeseen issues. I clearly hear Rick talking from experience that when you work with historic buildings, naturally there's going to be a lot of unforeseen issues that you just don't know until you start digging. But I thought that we had accounted for a good amount of that, and now this is nearly double what we thought. So I'm just curious if you can talk about that a little bit.
As far as the unforeseen and talking about just some of the work to sort of understand a lot of that?
Well, how was unforeseen thought of, budgeted for, considered in our original guaranteed maximum price?
Okay, so I would probably ask Rick if you want to talk about your experience with working with historic buildings, and then Cooper, if you can just talk about, as you got into the project, some of the challenges that you faced from a construction standpoint.
Okay. Maybe I can use an example, a very recent example, the old Boynton Beach High School, which is now the Boynton Beach Arts and Cultural Center. Similar type of roof, dome, curved roofs. The air conditioning picture is almost identical. Have any of you been to that building by any chance? No? Okay. So anyways, that was one where after, in the demolition phase, you start uncovering lots of things. That project, for example, I hate to tell you this, but it was a 20-year project. We did our first design study 3 days after 9/11. It was set for demolition December 2015, change in government February 2016, and it took 5 years to complete. Original budget was $4 million, ended up being $10 million on the project. That's the number. And very different type of development, procurement. It was design build. So we were actually even able to save more time, you know, because we were working with the contractor versus the contract for CM at risk is the general conditions are different, right? They have set fees that are paid every month, you know, and so very different type of delivery of the building, you know. So some of the issues, you know, for example, the structural ones and the mechanical ones, these buildings weren't air conditioned back then, you know, they were just open louvers, you know. This building in particular I've never run in, this is probably the most difficult one I've done in 35 years. Because it's not only historic, but it's historic with an addition. And the addition is about 1/3 of the historic. So very complex way of doing a project. Very needed because the original project was very small. But then we went to the community and we got input. The small building really would have been a couple of bathrooms, an elevator, and a food prep area. You know, it really would not have serviced the purpose of spending 10, or in that time period, $7 million to do something like that. The program expanded. We ended up with a larger building, the larger addition. The zoning issues, as I mentioned to you, came into play after the building was completely clean. You saw the roof pictures. All the roof was repaired. The mezzanine level is very tight with the 3rd level of the new building and the conflicts in the air conditioning. And then on top of that, when Andy and the mechanical reviewer came up and said, the plans, you know, yes, it was always going to be dining, but for planning purposes, building department purposes, it had ballroom, it had ballroom, it had ballroom. So if you look at the current plans, which have been all vetted out and completed, the stage is called the platform, and the ballroom is now called dining. And that impacted the cost of the mechanicals. In terms of structural, Boynton Beach, you're not going to believe this. Just never seen this in my life before with a building department. Not the same as our building department here. Because we changed the use from a high school, which is children under the age of 18, to a community center, which is everybody up to 100 years old, we had to double the load of the floors in the front 12 classrooms on 2 floors, okay? Big change order to meet some code requirements, some interpretations of code. So there's always a negotiation. They're very complex. Like I said, this has probably been the most challenging one I've done in my career, and it's one that I'll be very proud of, you know? The courthouse was unwrapping, right? We removed it and we rebuilt it. This one is not only, this was very interesting because it was an interior unwrapping. There were 3 floors of apartment. There was a little bar downstairs and 2 floors of little cubby apartments in that building. So we had to unwrap the interiors and then do the additions. So I think between the courthouse and this project, that'll be the 2 most significant ones that I've worked on. Thank you.
Commissioner Warren.
Mr. Root, can you tell us again what the original completion date was for the project?
2019.
2019. Okay. And I'm thinking of this because of one of my colleagues' questions, and we're talking about unforeseen. And one thing that was unforeseen is we had a pandemic that shut down a lot of things, and people being able to complete work and get out into the community to do a lot of things. So that is something that has pushed back the timeline. When we originated this in 2017, and we brought REG was that the first contract that we signed? Okay. And then we brought in Cooper Construction in 2018. When did we start the process of the demolition and the permitting and all of the things that were necessary in order to move forward?
So the permit application was submitted for, and I assume it's the selective demo, Mikkel. Is that accurate? So the permit was submitted back in November of 2018, and then it was approved in October of 2019. So Mikkel, you guys started the demo in October 2019? Yes, please come to the podium.
So this project was separated in two phases of construction. There's the first phase that included the selective demolition as well as the roof repairs. So concurrently, as we worked on phase one with construction, we were also in pre-construction gearing up for phase two, which we now all see and know as the new addition, the build out for the historical building and so forth.
So when did the demo start? Because
The demolition for phase one started in June of 2018. That's the demolition. So that is phase one.
And at that time, we still had an anticipated completion date of 2019. Or did we move that
is
back?
correct. Yes.
Okay. When we noticed the mechanical design issues, how long did it take to resolve the issues from the time that it was first noted to the time that it was corrected?
So the mechanical issues were identified in June of 2020, and then we submitted revised plans November of 2020. So what is that, 5 months from the point at which the mechanical design issues were identified. However, the permitted plans were being used since back in October of 2019. So the plans weren't revised from 2019 to 2020. And that's that date that I had mentioned, or that time frame for the building department.
So could the delays that we're looking at here, just from what I've listened to today, could these delays be a main driver in why there's such an increase?
If I had to point to two issues of why the project costs have increased and the delays, one is obviously the time that has gone by, in getting the information in the plans to properly keep Cooper moving forward with it. And then more specifically, the mechanical issues that had a ripple effect through the overall design.
Does Cooper have the opportunity to just simply present a request for GMP, or is that something that has to be initiated internally? How do we get to the point of the 3.3 that we're asking for today?
So when we have a revised set of plans, let me back up. So the GMP has to be brought forward, under me bringing the information forward and saying, okay, this meets all of the, essentially what is needed in order to finish the project. So that's been spending, at least since I've been in this seat, that's what I've been spending most of my time doing, is getting my hands around the project, understanding what's needed, and then bringing those aspects to you, which we're doing today. So that's the GMP. But as far as like understanding what's included in it, that was really done through quite a bit of analysis in order to get that price down as much as possible. And unfortunately, the reason it's taken so long is because we needed the information to properly get that amount to you. And so without the information in the plans that have been, approved by the city building department, so that I can say, okay, Cooper, give me what the cost is going to be. I can't bring you a GMP that I know is going to be accurate. This one I feel really, really confident on, even though it is way more than I had anticipated and hoped for. But again, it's essentially a judgment call on, do you spend more time trying to get the number down, or do you bring it forward knowing that, okay, at least you can move forward and there's a light at the end of the tunnel.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Mr. President and Commissioner Lambert, Commissioner Shove.
Thank you. My first question dealt with how we got here, where we started at the 6 or 7 million till where we are today. at that 19 million. I assume that 19 million includes the 3.3 million, though. The 18.8 includes the 3.3.
It includes everything, yes.
Right. So my question now is, what happens if this commission tonight declines to authorize an additional 3.3? Where does that leave us?
Well, it's something that I would probably want to talk with a city attorney on, but my guess is that we would have to use the GMP that's currently been set, the most recent one, and so that's that 6.2 million that's been allocated to the project, and figure out a way to bring the project to fruition under that amount. That would be my guess.
Okay, and then a follow-up, going back to Commissioner Schoth's comments about the assurances that this commission received back at the onset of this project, that the $10 million would be more than enough to have this project come to fruition. What kind of assurances would you be willing to offer us here today that this additional 3.3 is enough to complete the project? Are we going to be coming back, again, being asked for another $3-4 million in the future, or is this it?
I got to be honest with you, Commissioner. I would ask the development team members, both Cooper and mainly Cooper, on the assurances that this is going to bring the project to fruition. So I don't know if Mikkel or
So we went through and did, of course, detailed analysis, pricing of the drawings with our subcontractors. We received feedback, asked about the timelines. These guys are in the field. They do it on a daily basis, so we rely heavily on our subcontractors to give us accurate information, which they do. With that being said, time is maybe the most important thing at this point in time. So we can guarantee the number based on the current drawings that we price, but time is also an issue because as we see the current market conditions, we're constantly bombarded with emails, hey, price escalation cost, the market is changing. There's one subcontractor in particular that informed me that he was informed from his manufacturers quarterly on prices. This is 4 times a year. This same contractor is now telling me that he's receiving updates on prices weekly, twice a week. It's unheard of. So these are the things while we push for the approval of the Amendment 5, if the board so see fit, that we can move forward to actually get these prices locked in so that we can actually push the project forward, have some agreements on these prices, and of course, scale back the time on the project as much as possible.
Did that answer your question?
For now, thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Lambert.
Thank you. Mr. Roog, thank you so much for keeping me updated. I'm sure you had these same meetings with the rest of the commissioners throughout this process from what seemed like the moment that you realized something had gone wrong and likely we were going to be seeing increased prices. Throughout this presentation, I made a note of a few things that it sounds like that you and this development team have done to help us mitigate this continuing to snowball. And what I wrote down was the process to simplify and move to a TCO, as well as to hire and utilize an owner's rep. Can you please talk about the decision process that you went through to determine to utilize those factors, and are those things that we should look at as more best practices moving forward, or was that really a decision that needed to be made just in this particular circumstance?
Yeah, I would say that if we look at our other projects, most of them don't really require an owner's rep. So I would say that this one probably was more of an anomaly from that standpoint than the norm. But the reason the owner's rep was so important is because there were a lot of demands both on needing the information for the project to keep it moving, but then also getting clarity on exactly what the technical changes were because, as good as my CRA staff is, and, I have confidence in myself and understanding, having been coming from the construction background with the home builders, feel pretty confident in it, but not a licensed architect. and nor am I a GC. So it's very hard to really understand a lot of the technical aspects of what's needed to bring a building from, from refurbishment all the way to final product. And so because there was a lot of, I would say, discrepancies or just debate amongst the development team about what needed to be done to move forward, the owner's rep seemed like a prudent way to provide that clarity to give the CRA the proper direction on what's needed to do that. And Alfonso did that 100%. He's probably one of the biggest reasons why we've gotten the project to the point where it is today. As far as going to the TCO, which I think was your other question, yeah, I mean, V-Star and all of the beautiful renderings and a lot of the work that I think we still want to see done, that's additional information that needed to be included into the plans in order to get a proper GMP. And so again, because time was just ticking by day, I made the decision to just say, well, let's just remove that component for the time being. And let's simplify the plans so that we can continue to move the project forward and break that into another sort of phase, if you will. And then also thinking about that potentially it's actually maybe a good idea to have the operator on board, because obviously they're going to want to have a lot of say into what that interior looks like. They have to operate it. They have to understand the finishes and fixtures and the kitchen equipment that they're going to have to use, and understand a lot of the audio visual and all of those things. And that to have them at the table, and then potentially, since we have allocated some dollars to the operations of the building, perhaps they could actually bring some money to the table when we send that RFP out. And that's something that could be included in order to help us address the overall cost of the project, is to start using some private investment to subsidize and help with the public investment, the substantial one that we've made to date. So that's where, those were sort of my thoughts in trying to keep the project moving forward and trying to get it done in a timely manner.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that we pivoted and implemented some of those time-saving, hopefully money-saving opportunities, as well as continue to look at some in the future. And I did just want to comment, because I know Commissioner Peduzzi asked about 19 million, that's it. But you did mention, and I see the asterisks here next to the FF&E, that's still forthcoming, and that
Correct.
will be what I would imagine, a robust discussion on what that total cost will be as well.
Right, because our goal is going to be to save as much of that, if approved tonight, any additional monies, is to save as much of it as possible, because we do have to finish the FF&E for the project. We still need to have a grand opening. We still need to have a soft opening. There's still a lot of other costs that are going to have to come forward with the project. So it's just, again, I would say, biting it off in smaller chunks in order to keep the project moving and still maintain a level of accountability that I think you all are demanding that this project meet.
Thank you.
And I recognize that this is a very bitter pill to swallow, but we're like, to me, we're too far down the road to forsake this project now. And I think we need to swallow the pill to get it over the finish line, because anything else will be a significant failure and embarrassment to this body. And I know all of us weren't at the table when to get us to this point, but failure to complete this should not be an option. Commissioner Schoaf.
Thank you, Mayor. And having been down this road professionally a number of times, I think we do end up getting to a place where we are far enough down a road that we have to find a way to continue forward. Every single day that Cooper Construction is on site costs them money. There's overhead that they cannot avoid. And construction can only build based upon plans that they've been given. Plans can only be created based upon information that they know at the time. In this particular case, I have some concerns about what should or should not have been known, but it doesn't get us to a different place. So I guess the question that I have is, we can either create a project to a budget, or we can assign a budget to a project. Cooper's indicated some very real parameters that are surrounding cost of materials of which they have no control over. So I don't argue that perhaps the old GMP price isn't relevant anymore, even just due to those market conditions, and everyday time is money. But I guess where I would offer as kind of a medium ground is to figure out a way to get back to that first place where we create a project that gets to a budget. A $15 million project for this particular usage is still a really great project. It's $15 million worth of improvements. I find it difficult to choose between an additional $3.3 million in programming and other things that could go into the neighborhood, and then putting it into this project where it's going to be a really good $18 million project, $19 million project. So I guess I offer it to say, can we get to a place where we're covering, I understand the cost of constructions and how materials and lead times are growing every day, but perhaps there's a place to get back to closer to the original project that we were looking at and really scoping back to get into a budget versus continuing to approve additional budget.
Mr. President.
Thank you briefly, because I know we're running out of time, but you know, we keep talking about this $18 or $19 million project. Really, it was close to a $20 million project. We just happened to get a grant to cover some of that money late in the game, right? So we would have been looking at $20 million price tag, almost 19.8. So the other question I had was with regard to the change in scope. Not only is there an increase in cost at the 3.3 million, but there's actually a reduction in scope of the project also, correct?
That is correct.
Do we have a monetary value for the reduction in scope, or no? That it would have cost?
If you would like me, I have started looking at what the FF&E costs could be, but honestly, until I don't want to bring that forward just yet, because the numbers that have been given to me, again, I don't accept right now, and we're gonna sharpen our pencils before I bring back a number that I think is. I mean, if you all would like me to share it with you, I will. But you know,
Well, it's probably not relevant because we don't have an operator.
Correct.
And the operator is going to have a significant input into what is built on the interior.
I'm just
Okay.
suggesting that the original scope, Mayor, would have actually increased the cost from 3.3 to some other number if we had stuck with the original scope even, I assume.
Yes, because it would have included quite a bit of detailed and additional things that you know, aren't included in this one. So yes.
Okay, so I think we need to make some decisions here, commissioners, as to how we move forward. It's 4:48. We got to start City Commission promptly at 5. Do you want to table this and perhaps come back to it after the City Commission? Well, hold on. Let me ask the question first, because I don't want to start getting into a lot of comments and we run out of time. We need to make a decision on that. Do we want to table this, come back to it perhaps after the City Commission? We also have a card here we got to listen to. Do you want to table to another date certain? I don't want to rush this decision. This is a very, very difficult, tough decision. So I don't want us to rush into it. I want everyone to feel like they've had a chance to speak, ask questions, get all the information they need. But we are looking at a time crunch. So what is your pleasure? Try to get this done today after the City Commission meeting, or to push it off to another date certain?
Mayor, if we have one card that's 3 minutes, and I think we've all asked our items, that it looks like Commissioner Warren may have just a quick comment. I think we might be able to get this done.
You know her comment is quick? How did you know that?
I could tell
Okay.
in her eyes.
All right, okay. Commissioner Warren.
I'd just like to say that congratulations on your 1-year anniversary that's coming up in just a couple of days. And I
Thank
think
you.
that in a 1-year period, that a lot has happened, considering that this has been kicked down the road for such a long time. So I think that Mr. Rueg's expertise in economic development is essential right now, and that we have a grasp on what's happening. And time is of the essence, and we should move forward in making a decision, standing behind that decision, and looking forward to a great finished product.
Okay. Any other questions, comments from commissioners? Commissioner Schoaf.
Mayor, you had asked for some direction, and I guess I've heard concern from all of my colleagues to the mayor's point of not rushing this. I would like to have a couple more weeks to go back, and again, to date certain to next meeting to not delay it, but do we not owe it to go back and see if pencils can be sharpened and that we can make sure that we're mindfully spending tax dollars on this particular option if there are savings to be had? We've had a robust discussion here today. I put that out there for food for thought for a continued date certain in 2 weeks.
Okay, but time is money. Commissioner, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mayor. And while I would ordinarily agree with Commissioner Scho's sentiment on this, I'm concerned that time is money, just as the Mayor mentioned, that the longer we delay, the higher the costs are going to go, the more the materials are going to be, and that we're going to be looking at, if we see this in another 2 weeks or in a month, it's going to be $3.6 million. That's what I'm concerned about.
Okay, let's hear the card, and then we'll see if there's a motion to be made after that person speaks. Darren Studstill.
Good afternoon, Darren Studstill, 401 North Rosemary. I'm going to be very brief. First off, I want to say I am a Sunset supporter. I'm a Northwest supporter. Anything goes over in the Northwest, I'm very supportive of. I do heard comments about Commissioner about time is money, so I want things to happen. But at the same time, I want to make sure as we cut our budget, going into our budget season, that we make sure we communicate, if you're going to take money from somewhere and add to somewhere, that those concerns are heard, okay? I don't want this to get out in the community. We're putting, you know, I was a person on the Stullen Lee in 2002. That's 18 years of my life, where we say, okay, we're going to do the sunset, then we're going to do these other things, so come and invest. I've been a part of that process. Now we're here, and I want the sunset to get done, but at the same time, I don't want other things in the neighborhood or the business owners or the residents here that we're cutting and putting it on top of this. So all I'm saying is that making sure our communication is very important. I guess that's more of the commissioner's job, but I just want to make sure, because I know how the community is and what we're seeing and what we're feeling. So I just want to make sure those concerns are implemented as we move forward. But I do believe I'm a Sunset Northwest supporter. If we're going to do it, let's do it, get moving, but at the same time, hear the voice and the community concerns as you take dollars and move it one place to another. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Studstill. Okay, is there a motion to be made in the next 5 minutes?
Mayor, I make a motion to approve resolution number 21-40.
It's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Further
Move for discussion?
Yeah, further discussion.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to take a moment, you know, I've heard some of my colleagues here, and I just want to go on record. I'm supportive of this project. I'll move it forward today. This will be what I anticipate the last time that we're having this discussion. We've said the last time so many times. I want to be on record. I don't care if it's a 5-1 vote. This is the last time. Discussion ended.
Any other, Commissioner Lambert?
I would like to second Mr. Studstill's recommendation that we have a very transparent discussion of where this $3 million is coming from, or what projects, capital improvement projects, as you mentioned earlier, might be impacted by this as well. Thank you.
All right. Hold on, Chris. Let me see if the commissioners have anything else. All right, do you want to address that now? Or?
Yeah, the only thing is, Commissioners, we are anticipating a budget discussion August 9th. And that will be when we first discuss sort of the draft aspects of the project. So we'll be happy to highlight the increase in GMP and how that affects the overall CRA budget.
Thank you.
Any other discussion on the motion? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, like sign. Hearing none, motion carries unanimously. Thank you, and I hope that everyone on the Sunset team heard Commissioner Schoaf. Ain't no more money. All right, so don't even try it. Okay. All right. This meeting is. Any other comments from the commissioners? Okay, this meeting is adjourned. We will reconvene as a city commission at 5 p.m. Thank you.